Welcome back to Icon Diary. Wanting to paint an icon of St. Benedict of Nursia. This time I'm doing something slightly different. I'm not searching for a particular model, but will be drawing my own model. I have done some research from looking at other people's icons of St. Benedict, and I've noticed that traditionally he's old with a long white beard, that he is bald. He sometimes is dressed in quite ornate clothing, but having read his biography, I've decided not to put him in ornate clothing or carrying what looks like a bishop's staff, but to dress him in quite drab clothing. I think it reflects more his character and the discipline of Christian discipleship that he followed and the rule that he taught his followers. So with that information in my head, I'm just starting to sketch. And at this stage, I'm sketching with a very light pencil. So sorry, it's hard to see, but that's so that I get a pattern onto my piece of paper before I start making things a bit easier to see, which in just a moment will become obvious because I'm going to skip now to the darker pencil. You can perhaps see that underneath it all there is that light pencil sketch, but now with about a 4B pencil I'm putting in the facial features, so it's a bit easier for everybody to see. I have set the face not straight on, but looking slightly to the side, but wanting the eyes to look at the beholder, at the person looking at the painting. The method of sketching I'm using for this face is one that I've learned from some videos, from YouTube videos, who seem to like, and I've come to like also, a method established by Andrew Loomis. And it's serving me quite well in getting proportions right. It does not argue with what I've learned of other methods, certainly getting the proportions of the face with a nose length is the same as the length from the nose to the chin, is the same to the hairline, is the same to the top of the skull. And that's working quite well for me. Also getting the, this isn't a Loomis method, this is something I've learned from Philip Davidov and Olga Shalamova, getting the shoulders as 3/4 from the center of the sternum to the edge of the shoulders, 3/4 head length, but at the middle of the chest to the edge of the arms, a full head length. I like having a saint blessing the person who is visiting the icon. So the hand held in blessing is what I'm striving for here. It is quite common in icons of St. Benedict for him to be holding a book. Book usually means Bible, and that's okay. But the thing about St. Benedict is that he is famous for having written the monastic rule. So that's what I'm intending to have in this icon, and have the book open with Well, he wrote about 9,000 words in his rule, so I'm limited to what I can place on this page. But what I really like is something that he wrote in an opening section of his rule for monastic life, where he says, "Turn aside from evil and do good. Seek out peace and follow it." So that's what I will attempt to include on the pages of the book that will be open in this icon of Benedict of Nursia. Well, there's my sketch, and then I had to decide how to translate this onto a panel for painting. And I did something I've not done for a while, and that is to trace it at least in part. And I put some red ochre on the back of the photocopy of the image, and then just put, with a pen, just traced a few bits of outline. And that sort of got me started, having found the central point on the panel, and then got those reference points marked in with the red ochre, which I found very effective. I've not actually done it that way before, and I rather like it. I'd read that method just recently, and works well. So I, with yellow pigment, I had put in the details, first of all just with pigment and water, and then with egg tempera, worked up the outline of my icon, and then started to fashion, to shape, to mould the face and the hands, but I won't be showing that. I'm having a bit of a focus on the face in this video. And so I have mixed the pigment of raw umber green. Now, I've started with it being very dilute, and just put in the basics, and then less dilute, putting in darker shading with a bit more pigment in the mix, and gradually moulding the face that I want. So it's a monochrome image at this stage, but with a green tinge. Now, normally with these videos I've been showing the painting at about 4 times normal speed, sometimes even faster. In this video I've changed my mind, and so what you're seeing throughout is normal, natural time. I'm not going to show the the whole process as a result, because of that, because it would just, well, we'd be here for about 3 days. So just small sections, but in real time. And you might get a different sense of how ponderous it is, how slow it is. Almost each stroke you're thinking about, where's this going to go? What you don't see is that each pigment mix that I've done, I've tested on a piece of paper, usually on the pad beside me, just to see what the colour is. I've gone back here to the lighter one. It's more dilute. Then we need, I'm going to actually dare, when that's quite dry, to come back, go even darker. Just as a reminder, as I've said earlier on in this video, there isn't a model that I'm working from. This is working pretty much from my reading of the story of Benedict, looking at a few images, but really this is an original icon. Now this is getting really quite dark. Oh, there's a little white hole that's appeared. Happens when wet on wet. You think you're putting it on, and in fact you're taking it off, and you go right back to the gesso. Well, once this moulding is finished, the monochrome image of the face all worked out, I'm going to cover the whole of the face and the hands with a membrane of flesh colour, which will be done with golden ochre, a tiny bit of Ercolano red, a tiny bit of the green, the raw umber green that I've been using, but it will be coat after coat until it's quite dark. Let's listen to something of the story of St. Benedict. This piece was written by Gary Stuckey. Benedict of Nursia was born around the year 480 in the Common Era in Umbria, Italy. 4 years before his birth, the Roman Empire had fallen, and the world into which Benedict was born was one of violence, turmoil, uncertainty, and insecurity. Around the age of 19 or 20, he travelled to Rome to study the liberal arts. However, he found life in the city dissolute and immoral, not to his liking at all. So around the year 500 in the Common Era, he abandoned his studies and went to live in an isolated place near Efide, or modern Affili. After living here for about 2 years, he sought deeper solitude. He took up residence in a cave at Subiaco. Romanos, a monk who lived nearby, encouraged him to live the hermit life, supplied him with a habit, and on occasions brought him food. Over time, he gradually became known for his piety. When the abbot of a nearby monastery died, the monks asked Benedict, even though he was only about 25 years old, to come and be their abbot. Knowing of their way of life and being unimpressed by it, Benedict was reluctant to go. Eventually he went and unfortunately found his misgivings were confirmed. Their way of life was very different from Benedict's, and they were in no mood to be reformed by him. After 2 attempts to poison him failed, Benedict returned to his solitude. But he was by now well known, and people would come to him for spiritual guidance. It was at this point he began the monastic life that would later flourish. In the valley of Subiaco, he established 12 small monasteries, each with 12 monks and a superior. This success was not received well by the nearby priest, who tried to undermine Benedict's efforts. Eventually, this opposition got the better of him, and he moved the monks to the famous Monte Cassino, which became and has remained the central home of the Benedictine family. It was here he wrote his famous rule, and it was where he died on March 21st, 543. Benedict's feast day is July the 11th. Benedict is known mostly for the rule of monastic life that he wrote, and which has been the most influential document on Western monasticism. It's very short, about 9,000 words, but renowned for its moderation, balance, and gentleness, containing, as Benedict said, nothing harsh, nothing burdensome. His aim in writing the rule was that it should be a guide to living the Gospels. Thus it is saturated with biblical references and images. The best known parts of the rule are chapter 7 on humility and chapter 53 on welcoming guests to the monastery as Christ. In our world, which perhaps reflects something of Benedict's with the violence and uncertainty, the voice of this monk is speaking in a fresh way in our time. He calls us to a balance of prayer and work, of seeking to be aware of God's presence everywhere and seeing in all others the presence of Christ. In a world where we can feel life is out of balance, where our environment is in a perilous state, and where human divisions abound, perhaps it's a good time to learn the wisdom of Benedict again. Well, we've been putting on highlights, and for this there's been the base flesh mixture that I made for the membrane for that flesh tone with the golden ochre, a little bit of Colano red, and a tiny bit of the raw umber green, and then we've just been adding a little bit of titanium white. And this is about the third lot of highlights, just adding it gradually and blending it, attempting to be able to see what is underneath each coat. And one of the things about titanium white is that it does take out a lot of the chroma. But all the while, I have been working on the hand as well, and here is some of the final highlights going on for the hand, trying to pick out fingernails, the knuckles, using a very fine zero brush. For the most part, all the brushes that I've been using, apart from right at the beginning, which was hog hair, but now using the Kolinsky brushes. It is a fairly stylized hand. It's often the case in icons that some of the postures or gestures that the hands make are quite impossible, actually. But as I've said, the titanium white can look quite pasty, and so as a result, from time to time we'll put a glaze of the flesh tone over the top. Now for the hair and beard. This is a number 2 Kolinsky brush. And it's just beautiful for leaning on to get this as a sweep. Start at a point, then lean into it, take the pressure off and come back to a point. That's the beauty of these brushes. So good at doing that. Each loading of the brush is fairly dry. It's wiped off, but it still holds a good body of paint. The reason for wiping it off and painting fairly dry, that is thin coats, is that there's much more control. You don't get surprised by great blobs of wet paint. It's using a mixture of the raw umber green and the flesh tone for defining the spaces between the white bits of beard. A little bit of blush using Ercolano red, just with water. Just water, just a tiny bit. That's enough. So the face and hands are complete. It's a reasonably ruddy complexion. There's quite a bit of Ercolano red in that, and I'm content with that complexion. This filming is done as a series of still photographs taken 10 seconds apart as I paint, and you're seeing half a second of each of the photos. Burnt umber is being used for the shading, and then a bit of burnt umber added to chromium oxide for the clothing, and I'm wanting to knock back the brightness of chromium oxide. And now for the highlights, as we add a little bit of titanium white, notice how it dries darker almost immediately. So there's more titanium white in it now, so it's a bit brighter. Again, it goes on brighter than it dries. I had added a glaze of the original mixture of chromium oxide and burnt umber. Now for the book, doing something I've not done before. Used to having white pages if I've got writing on an open book. This time I started by using red ochre, and I decided when I had put the red ochre on that I actually didn't like it. So I have completed it in the one colour in the red ochre, but for the next coat I have replaced the red ochre with burnt sienna. I've also stopped using the 3 brush in order to use my flat brush. It gives a much better coverage at this stage. So this is still red ochre. Now it's been changed to burnt sienna. It's just that bit darker and less chroma. This is Ercolano red. I do try and keep my palette as small as possible. Ercolano red's been used in the flesh tones, so we're using it in the edge of the book. It's to be represent Benedict's book of rules. He wrote the rule for monastic life. Another coat of burnt sienna. Another coat of Ercolano red. So I was saying earlier, this is done in real time. I haven't sped up these videos. This is splitting the page down the middle with some burnt umber, also defining the page with the burnt umber. Straight lines are not easy. Now with some yellow oxide and titanium white to brighten it up. A few page lines again, straight lines. Looks easy when it's sped up, doesn't it? Well, it's agony when it's in real time. One of the tricks in doing straight lines is to either have a reference point beside it. So the reference point beside it at the moment is the other straight line, so keeping that equidistant. The other is to look where you're going, not where the brush is. Now, one of the difficulties I'm working with here, I realized later on, is that the tone of the habit, of the clothing, that green, is very similar. It's a dark tone, and it's similar to the dark tone of the page. And so having a bright tone to form a delineation between the two colours I hope will help. I wasn't persuaded to change the page to white. Quite striking, I think, in an icon where the page isn't the colour you expect it to be. So now, a phrase from Benedict's rule. I'm going to the last word so that I make sure that it gets the space I want it to deserve. So the phrase or the clause at this stage is turn from evil and do good. I've left out the and, just having as few words as will actually make sense. Turn from evil. Do good. And then in the very next sentence, he says, seek peace. And follow it. I've just left it as seek peace. Well, seek out peace. I do have to confess that I did come back to repaint this word, and it was because of a very simple and silly error. When I was painting in the line at the bottom of the page, I changed its direction. I wasn't paying attention, and so it changed the orientation of this right-hand page from that of the left-hand page, so that the word peace fell away instead of being, see how it falls away there? Well, it didn't work, so I fixed it up. But then I took the mixture that I still had from painting the habit, the clothing, and I added a little bit of that to titanium white. So it's white tinted with the pigments that make up the habit. And I'm using a big squirrel mop brush for doing this background. Quite good for doing these detailed little bits and then leaning on it and getting a nice big brush stroke. good for cutting in. Just what's happening here. Nice straight line down beside the book. Because I'm right-handed, it's tricky to cut in on the other side of a figure. So it does work much better for me if I turn the icon upside down. I don't have to work back-handed then. We're working something very light up against white hair so that the dark line on the outside just needs to show. I think it's going to be okay. Good. It's about 3 coats later and it works all right. We're ready for halo and inscription. I get so nervous about putting in the halo with the pen that I keep forgetting to turn on the camera. It was all ready to go and hello, I did it again. But it went in perfectly. Oh, I wish you could have seen it. When I painted the inscription Benedict, it was all out of focus, so I've ditched that. But here I am painting the word Nursia, or Nursia, and I started painting it backwards so that I would know where it would fit up against the margin. I struggle to spell in the right direction, so this is really nerve-wracking doing it backwards. However, I'm rather glad that I did, because if I had have started the other way around, I'd have run out of room. Just wait and see what happens. Now we've got to get an N in there. But I've also got to fit in of. Where can I put of? Oh, up there. That'll work. Hooray!